Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Industry Season 3, Episode 3, It. That's the end of the sentence. It. My name is Grace Leeder. Of course, I'm not alone, but I'm not with my usual cohorts. They are off, I think, at a climate conference. So instead, I'm joined by someone who has fallen into rough times, has had to lease her $11.9 million yacht instead of owning it outright. It's Jess Sterling. Jess, how you doing?
So excited to be here. Just jumped on my PJ, made my way
Mm.
over, love a conference.
Yes, a conference episode on HBO
Mhm.
Sunday night, Jess. We love it.
It really shades of our Jestys from Succession, shades of like any location based episode of Succession. We got puffy vests.
Did get
Like
puffy
they
vest.
they really rolled out the red carpet for me today, Grace. They were like, "We
Eh,
heard Jess was gonna guest. We
yeah.
have to make it as succession-y as we possibly can."
We got puffy vest, but Eric was making sure he doesn't have puffy eyes. He had the gold, he had the little things under his eyes
Yeah,
before bed.
yeah,
So,
eye
mhm.
patches. Not eye patches. Those go
Yeah,
under your eyes. Under
you know.
eye patches.
Is that what pirates are doing? They're trying to make sure they don't have bags under their eyes?
They're exhausted from pirating all night long.
All right, well, we're gonna get into it. It's a there's a lot that happens this episode, a lot of businessy talk and maneuvering. Make sure you're subscribed to the We Know Scripted TV podcast feed. Make sure you're checking us out on YouTube if that's your fancy. YouTube.com/, We Know Scripted TV. And give us a rating and a review. And also a thing I'm gonna start doing because I hear so many other podcasts do it, so it must work. Which is tell a friend that you're watching Industry and that also you listen to our recaps of Industry and all the other podcasts we have going on here on We Know Scripted TV. Down the Hatch is back. There's the Tastemakers. There's TV for Real. The weekend program. There's a lot going on here, Jess, and you're basically helping out with all of those things. You're in all
I'm
of
here
them.
behind the
Yeah,
scenes just
yeah,
listening in. I'm that secret invisible guest who just hangs out behind the scenes most of
yeah.
the time.
Well, I mean, not behind the scenes, but in front of the scenes. You should tell a friend so you can be just like Jess and be hanging out and listening to every podcast we have here, so you won't miss a thing. Yeah. All right, so this episode is called It's Jess, and I'm wondering where we should start in terms of the episode. But basically, we are going to this climate conference in hopes that it will save the stock price of Lumi that is a bit questionable. It seems like at the end of the last episode, they were like, don't worry, it's actually fine. And then they're like, JK, that actually wasn't enough to save it. There's the threat of this sort of a journalist who will reveal sort of his recommendations of what people should do with their Lumi stock. There is the potential new endeavor that Harper and Petra are going on. There is a panel that Eric's going to be a part of. A whole lot to get into. What do you take as the headline from this episode, Jess? Where do you want to begin?
I want to start with Harper and Petra.
Let's do it.
And the reason is because you and I talked, I believe, off of a podcast about season 2 of Industry. And I had said the thing that I thought was really
Mm.
missing from season 2 was Harper and Eric. I loved their dynamic in season 1, and I felt like we were really missing it in season 2. Obviously, we're even further removed from it with season 3, being that Harper is no longer at Pierpoint.
They're not even making eye
However,
contact, Jess.
yeah, they can't. He can't even look at her anymore. But we have Petra, who's now kind of subbing in terms of it feels like a mutually beneficial relationship rather than mentor mentee here, but certainly fascinating. And I just think, okay, I'm in the midst. This is going to be a weird parallel to make, but I'm in the midst of an It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia like first
Oh,
time watch. Okay,
wow.
those people are terrible.
They are
Okay,
terrible. Yeah.
and every time they meet a new character, I say to my husband, I say, they're about to ruin that person's life. Like that
Yes.
person's life is over. It's about to be
Yes.
ruined.
How
And
far are
sometimes
you
I
into
feel
it? How far are you into It's Always Sunny?
so I'm doing a curated watch, but
Uh,
we're on season 13, I think.
oh, so yeah, you've seen the downfall of Rickety Cricket.
Oh my yes, this
that man's
poor man.
that man's like the best example of someone who the Sunny crew has just absolutely
Exactly.
demolished.
Yeah. And so
Mhm.
I feel like Harper is starting to feel like that sort of character for me, where everything
Mm.
she touches turns to poop, turns to bad things. And Petra just feels like another someone who's come along and attempted to like both help Harper and use her. And I feel like it's not going to end well for Petra.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because I think that what is most compelling, we talked a lot about not having Eric and Harper, that we do, as I alluded to, we do get this like moment that I thought was just stellar at the end of the episode, and makes me like so uncomfortable in the way that I do love. I was recommending a movie to people today, and I was like, "Did you watch this?" And someone was like, "Yeah, the movie's so cringe." I was like, "Oh yeah, I get, yeah, actually, yeah, I guess it's true. Yeah, that movie does make you feel comfortable, but I loved it, you know."
Mhm.
But I'm so interested in terms of like where they're going because I thought and I really do commend industry, I think, for being a show that I think normally would another show would linger in something and hold on to like Eric and Harper being, mentor mentee in a way that this show like the best probably phrasing is they just like burn through plot of like I feel like these 3 episodes there is another version of somebody else writing industry where the first 2 episodes are the entire season of season
Mhm.
3 where it's like okay, we're gonna help Lumi, and it's like the build up to like when the Lumi stock goes live, and when it goes live, and then like whether it's good or bad, and like a build up where like Harper's been working for Anna, but Petra has been around, and now there's this world after like the end of a season, they're gonna go in together and create like that would be the season finale. Is like the Lumi stock opens and is like awful, and
Yeah.
and Harper quits working for Anna after a full season, and they don't. I think in a way that some people are finding it to be too quick. Like it's like, oh, we're moving
Mm.
to, and I think that that's like for me, I really love thinking about the way shows try to capture emotion and vibes through the way that they create and tell stories. And this one is that I think from the world of like stocks and trading and all of this stuff that like this show wants to move really fast. Like there's never a world I think if you're like work in the world if you're a trader like these people are, and I mean trader as in trader, just not. I mean they are kind
Mhm.
of traitors as well.
Most of
um
them,
None of
yeah.
them are faithful, as Alan Cumming would say. But I think that there's a world where like that's probably what it feels like to be in this job of like there's these moments that Robert is telling Henry in a previous episode, like, dude, it's a day. And he's like, nope, stock's down 5%, stock's down 8%. Like the way in which like your world moves so fast and any little thing can sort of like break open a seismic shift. That's a bad metaphor, but there's a seismic shift in everything that's happening. That's the way the show sort of wants us to move through and feel as we're watching it in a way that I think some people are finding like, I do not like this. I want you to slow down and tell me everything that's
Mhm.
happened and linger in moments. Um, because last episode, I felt like what they wanted to tell us was if you work in this, and I keep saying industry, and then I realized, oh yeah, that's the name of the show. But if you
Mhm.
work in this business, I'll use a synonym, that it's already ruthless enough and can sort of pressure you into making bad decisions, and it's sort of like capitalistic and can rot the inside of your body without having to do anything illegal. And yet both Harper and Yasmin have been doing things that are illegal. And there's another moment in the episode where Harper's like, why don't you just take a picture of the thing? And she's like, that's because that's I don't think that's legal. But then this episode, like it ends up being Harper who gets the big win of the episode. And she's the one, I think you're right. I think Petra desperately wants this to be like, you are my young mentor. I'm gonna train you, I'm gonna mold you. And that is not Harper. Jess, that is
No.
not who she is. And she takes every moment of this episode to make sure that Petra understands or knows maybe what Harper wants her to do.
Yeah, it just feels very dangerous. And Petra, you know, all of these people are very self-interested, especially people that Harper seeks out usually are the self-interested people. Eric, Petra both feel like they're kind of cut out of that same cloth. Whereas her current boss, is it Anna? I'm so
Anna,
sorry.
yeah,
Whose
it's
name?
Anna.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anna, obviously it's all under the guise of like, oh, we're trying to invest in like lovely, non-toxic or eco-friendly companies and all this stuff. At the end of the day, they all want to make money. And Harper and Petra seem they have a common goal. And so they want to link up. And Harper is the mouthpiece in a lot of ways, right? She's the salesperson. She's the one who can sell people on an idea. Petra isn't as warm and fuzzy. I mean, not that Harper is, but she doesn't have that ability really, right? So they're going to link up. but I just don't see this going well for Petra. I think this is a very common thing. I think they say it in therapy a lot too. Like when someone shows you who they are, believe them.
Hmm.
And I feel like Harper's reputation should be believed a little bit more, like people know what her background was. She got hired with Anna because of the connection with Yaz, right? She was an administrative assistant. Don't give her the leeway. If you give her a centimeter, she will take 10 miles and run with it. And I just think she's so dangerous. I know Harper is maybe, if you're going to pick one main character of the show,
Yeah.
arguably it's Yaz this season, but
Oh,
the
I
other
agree.
seasons it's been Harper. But she's a villain in many ways. And so this entire endeavor is really scary. And also I just feel like it does not bode well, Grace, that every time that Harper makes a move, she's always doing it without informing her partner or, boss, whatever Petra is to her. She's making these moves without her permission, without her consent, without notifying her beforehand. And they're not small moves. Harper doesn't know what a small move is. She only makes big moves. And so
Yeah,
I
she's
just
the
think
Sierra Easton of industries. The
she
big moves. She would vote out her mom, I
she
think.
would vote out her mom. She
Yeah.
loves big moves. And
Yeah.
it's just really scary. I would be very scared to start any sort of new venture with Harper, considering how every other thing in her life has ended. It just feels like a terrible decision. Obviously, Petra doesn't know her well enough to know that yet.
Yeah, well, you know what? I disagree. I think Petra does know who she is, and I think what is
Mm.
compelling about this show is there is this also belief of like, man, how has Harper not just been fired? I mean, which she is at the end of last season, but
Yeah.
like, how is she brought on? And the thing you have to, because there's this moment in season 1 where like she buys the stock on behalf of the guy without his clearance, and then she loses all that money. It's like she would totally just be fired, but there you have sort of have to buy in this world that she is sort of this dynamo. She is this whiz. She has a knack for it.
Yeah.
In a way that like actually Petra doesn't quite have. Like Petra, if she's in, like she has a very good record. Peter I believe that's Peter Muck, I believe, is who goes into the room, and which is Henry's uncle, who goes into the room to like, we're gonna go look at our financials. Well, Otto, I believe, I'm hoping I'm getting these characters' names right. Otto sits in the main room and they chit chat back and forth about whatever. But so they check, and he comes back out and he's like, the finances are great. Like she makes up a ton of like future Dons, like, she's the
Mhm.
one who's making money for this company, and so there's something there we can trust in, like her ability to do that. I think what Petra sees is the things that she doesn't have. And I think it's like I think it's a different relationship than the one with Eric, because I think Eric saw somebody in Harper who could be like him, as opposed to Petra, who I think sees something that is complementary, but I would agree with you, in a way that is extremely dangerous. I think most outlined by the fact that it's Harper who comes up with this name Leviathan, which is the beast that comes from, an underwater beast that comes from,
Mhm.
the deep dark depths of the water. That's the name Harper is drawn to, in terms of, and that feels like when Petra's like, yeah, oh, okay, I like it. Like, yeah. That feels like bad news for Petra, where I think both her and Eric saw the talent of Harper, and both thought that they could like sand the edges down and create her into something that they want. And Petra, I think, has said, Harper stands up and asks this public question while her boss is on the panel and is like, actually, I'm actually forming a rival trading firm. It's very bold, very
What
bold.
a
And
way
without,
to announce that. I could never be so bold, Grace. Honestly, I would be terrified to do this, but Harper
yeah,
just does things. Like she just goes with her instincts for better or worse. And a
yeah,
lot of times her instincts are correct in terms of the business, the industry, if you will. But I think at the expense of most personal relationships that she ends up having, and sometimes it goes south because she is inexperienced. And I think this is something we hear Petra say multiple times just this episode, is how young Harper is and
he's
how
calling her a
inexperienced
child,
she
and
is.
yeah.
Yeah, and so that feels like a red flag for me as well, that okay, you're starting up this new thing. It's just the two of you. and you're bringing on Harper, who doesn't exactly have the best track record. Yes, she has great instincts, but she's willing to make these moves that will either you'll sink or swim, and there's no in between.
Yeah.
And it makes me nervous. Granted, I'm really excited about the character of Petra. I think she's fascinating,
I
and
think Sarah
you know,
Goldberg is quite tremendous in this role too.
she's
It's
so
very
good.
excellently cast because she was always a little like unlikable. I think in Barry as Sally in
Yes.
a way that was very interesting because she also was completely a victim in terms of she was dating a hitman. So it's like it was a very interesting role that I think it's
Yeah.
well suited to get her see her chops in a little bit more of a drama than it is a comedy. So
Hmm.
um the piece here that I do think, so I talked about this idea that like they needed to learn that they could actually not cut corners and not actually do things that are illegal. And that actually I kind of wondered whether that was a little bit of a sticking point. I talked with Josh and Emily last week and was like, Harper maybe could go to jail, and Josh joked like that does feel like a thing that could be like a real consequence for Harper. And then this episode happens where she does not seemingly learn, like, don't do illegal things, like don't have the smirk on your face when you tell me about how you got the secret information inside Pierpoint. She's like, take the picture of the screen, and Petra's like, that's illegal, I think. And we find out what happened to Jesse Bloom, this episode, which is that he is in prison. He is in a correctional facility in Florida, seemingly for having participated in insider trading. I would presume would be the reason, but I guess they don't actually officially say. It could be any number of things. If he was willing to do that, he also could have got just flagged. And I believe they also do say it was like sort of like a small chart. They make a joke about Al Capone. So I actually
Yeah.
now take Harper going to jail maybe off the table unless
Because
we
we already
think
have
that
someone
like
in jail. Yeah.
unless she's going to jail and Jesse Bloom is going to be back on the show in season 4. I don't know,
This is
but
just wild. The way in which they just dropped that information so casually in a sentence was astounding. I had to rewind and be like, "Excuse me, what? He's where?" Because I know this was a question that you all had come up with on the podcast.
where's Gus?
Is
Where's
Gus
Gus?
returning?
Yeah.
I will just say I'm going to shout from the rooftops. Absolutely loved Gus. I felt like he was underutilized in season 2, or at least I preferred his season 1 storyline to his season 2 storyline. He felt a bit aimless last season.
Oh, I liked him better
However,
in season 2, I think. But
oh, this is interesting.
shout out for Gus, who is currently starring in Alien Romulus and doing a tremendous job in that. So he's doing
love
some
that for
stuff,
him.
but yeah.
But yeah, this pretty much confirms like we're not going to be seeing Gus. Jesse Bloom is now out of the picture. And yeah, he went to jail, but Harper again got off scot-free. I just don't think she's going to. Yes, she did get fired. However, she then got a cushy job thanks to a connection she had with Yaz. I just think there's going to be more comeuppance, there has to be more that's going to happen to Harper because she really didn't learn her lesson. And I don't know that she will until she's faced with more serious consequences than she has been already. But I really like this relationship. I think it's interesting to have Petra as a character for Harper to interact with because, I wasn't a huge fan of just seeing her kind of alone on an island in this new company with Anna, like not really interacting as much with Yaz and Robert and all the other industry folks. So I really like this storyline. I'm really interested to see where it goes. And I loved her like having this meeting with Eric where he won't even look at her.
Well,
Just so good.
before we get to that, I do want to, because the news that Jesse's in jail comes from Otto, and there is this. So again, going back to this thing last week, where it was like, you don't need to be like this ruthless, this to survive in this industry. And then she has this conversation where he's like, I think you're actually one of us. You're a rebel. Like you're one of the bandits, he says. And this to me is so dangerous because I think this then fuels what we get between Harper and Eric, where I now think Harper does not think Eric is a bandit. Like if you a troublemaker is also what she gets called, right? It's a war of all against all. You're a troublemaker. Peter's a troublemaker too. You're one of us, one of the bandits is the line there.
Yeah.
And so she goes back to this conversation where they set up the morning meeting using Yasmin, which we'll get into Yasmin's sort of journey this episode. I really do think it is, on one hand, I'm like, oh, they're burning through plot, but also a lot of this does seem to be like, let's get this crew back together whoever we can, rather than just sort of like, hey, can I call you for a favor? We are now back in a relationship where actually, to a degree, Eric and Yasmin are working for Harper, is a very interesting dynamic to put into play in the
Mhm.
show, because he fired her. Um, and just the gusto she comes back in this meeting with, of staring daggers at Eric and saying, yeah, you have to, like, you will pick up the phone and you will answer me right away, which is very funny because, like, last episode, Jess, what did he do but answer her call? And she didn't say anything. And it takes her now to have like so much power to be like, you will answer
Mhm.
my call. Like, he did answer your call. Like, he answered it and you just didn't say
Yeah.
anything. But now she has this level of authority over him that is so good. And all that's the way that everything sort of ties in together, because there's a way in which like Yasmin's journey leads her to this scene. So we'll get to that. The way Eric's journey, I think, leads him to the scene where they know they have him because he can't have an F up of saying, well, yeah, I had the meeting with them and they came to me first, but then I said no and they went somewhere else, right? Like, this, it is a pretty fun way in which they tie in all the stories together to get to this, I thought, really excellent scene that I hated watching, which is Harper like demeaning Eric. And I know that that's like
Certainly.
unfair because they all suck, but like, I didn't like watching it, but I loved
No,
watching
but
it.
I think this whole episode really felt like, I think after season 1, we all had a very specific view of who Eric was as a character. And I think since then the show has kind of been breaking that character down a little bit and really putting him through his paces, basically. So, in this episode, I don't know, I just feel like the show is telling us Eric is a little sad. Like, he doesn't have it all together and his life is a little sad right now. And one of the first scenes of the episode, we get this one of his I think it's a coworker, right, who's saying, "Oh, you think being a partner will put you like at the top of the ladder, but you're just at the bottom of another ladder."
This is the lady from the first episode. This is basically, I think, like in some form, like in charge or head of the board. Basically,
Okay.
when he gets made partner, she's in the room, and there's a joke with Bill about like, she, I think, calls him a diversity hire, basically, like, to his face,
Okay.
right? So she's a full level. This is also who he calls when he messes up the, like,
Right.
he claims he does not, and nobody would have done the panel. Everyone would have been screwed by the panel, just the way that the events fold out. And she says, this is actually executive level business, not partner level business. So that's who this lady is. That they're, yeah, I mean, I've heard of night golfing, but I've heard it in like, my brother and sister-in-law sometimes go night golfing, but it's like you drink and you have glow in the dark golf balls. I haven't really seen real night golfing, I don't think, which I thought was like, what a very funny
Yeah.
situation, like the set for them to be together. But yeah, that is one of the opening shots we get of like, yeah, you thought it was the top of the ladder, but it's actually the bottom of a new ladder. I thought was a very good
Yeah,
one.
and he seems to be constantly, I don't know, unhappy this episode. We get a lot of scenes of him just like being put in his place, being told he's old, like being told he's an old man. And
Hmm.
I think that's exactly the antithesis of what he wants to be. He wants to be the young buck in the business, you know. He wants to be the guy that he built himself up to be in his head. And I think what he's coming to find out is that, yeah, he is at the bottom of another ladder. Like, there's no end to this climbing he's been doing. And now, what's worse is the person that he fired, that he was a mentor to, is now going to be like in charge of him in a way. And gosh, you have to imagine a character like Eric with just this massive, massive ego. What a huge blow to that ego. To, I mean, how many ways does this guy get ragged on this episode? He gets told he's old. He gets put in the back of the PJ. Everyone knows, Grace, when you're on a PJ, if you're sitting in the back, I mean, you're basically a second class citizen.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I actually think the most compelling insight we get into who Eric is as a person comes from a scene that you could argue it's comic relief here, which is where
Hmm.
he encounters a lady named Susie who he ends up calling himself Robert. Yeah, Robert, and he they have a night together, and in the morning he now has a $20,000 a bill. Okay, can I tell you?
This
Okay,
is a very I mean, I don't know I don't know, but like there was a lot of add-ons. He's adding a lot of customization to his experience.
Can I say what I think is a little is that I believe I guess it is more than 20K, and then she says let's call it 20K if I'm doing my math. I
Hmm.
guess I'm doing my math right. That's pretty funny. And then but then seriously, he goes, she reads him the bill, she like gives him the invoice, and is like, 2K, and I take Bitcoin or whatever. And then he's like, so do I F like I'm young, like was I good?
Was it
And
good? Yeah.
that is so telling to me of Eric. And I think that there's a way, like, this scene, I really don't think that the creators of this show do put much in here for nothing. I don't feel like there's a lot
Yeah.
of stuff that we could be like mostly. I think that they've gotten so much better. Actually, it's a credit I give to them for the show in terms of this show sort of getting promoted from the Monday night slot into the Sunday night slot show. I think is extremely well deserved, because I think that there was fluff to get rid of in season 1, and sometimes in season 2, in a way that I am not feeling like that for season 3. I feel like these have been 3 really tremendous episodes, and this moment could be like seen as silly, and it's in here for no real reason. There's also a moment. Is it this episode? It's this episode where the lawyer friend, because
At the
Yasmin and her have
beginning
a
of the
call,
episode, yeah,
right,
she
even
calls
before
him
golf.
old,
Yeah, we're
and
at different places. We're in different spots in our life.
it
Yeah.
really feels like after she makes that comment, he gets very in his head about, am I actually old? Like, am I out of touch? And I think it's not just necessarily in the bedroom. I think he's also feeling that
Yes.
way since he was quote unquote promoted previously, but basically taken off out of the bullpen, taken off the desks, and then at the end of season 1 into season 2, that's where he starts. I think he's really insecure at this point, and
I forgot about
I
this.
don't think.
He has 2 people if he F's like he's young. So she says,
Yeah,
"You're an old man." He says, I don't F like one, right?" And then after he has with the sex worker, he
yeah.
basically asked the same
And
question. I feel like that's very telling.
I think like it makes sense too, because it right, like I think she's the professional, like in her professional
Yeah.
opinion, does he F like he's old? It makes sense that he's asking her, but then he just like completely he just doesn't pay her, leaves. And because
Mhm.
he uses a fake name, she comes down and is like, "Yeah, Robert, come
That's
on,
so
Robert,
funny.
everyone." And he's like,
It's very good. It's very good. It's very funny.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, I mean, I think all of that leads us to where Eric is by the end of the episode. So in addition to that, the other thing that happens that we talked about briefly, which is that the panel like doesn't go well. It seems to be going fine, and then Frank's thing, like, article drops that basically says hold on Lumi stock, which when he works for the bank and he's not saying buy, that's bad. It's like that's bad news for a new stock. People should be you're in the moment of a new IPO, that people should be buying the stock and not selling it. And so the idea that you would just hold on your stock basically means sell. And I thought the show did a pretty good job of explaining this sort of business lingo here in terms of like what Frank's I believe his name is Frank, which is played by the
Frank,
wonderful
yeah.
Joel Kim Booster. Um so uh the panel goes poorly, and now he's on the defenses, and he does ask this question about like, okay, what does this mean for the other IPOs? We meet this man named Olaf, who's sort of attached to Anna at Future Dawn as well, and he's chosen Pierpoint to be where he will set his IPO up. That is now delayed. Eric wants to know more, and so all of this basically, I think, very excellently leads into, as I said before, the final scene where Eric basically has to take this meeting and have to take the new Leviathans business on, because he can't risk coming back to the bank and having another failure. I absolutely love the through line. We only really get it twice this episode, but that we are going to a climate conference in
Yes.
Switzerland, and Eric is upset that there's no snow. And the whole time of like, it's like, yeah, climate change is real and it's happening, but like, who actually cares? We don't give it up. And then it's like, but man, there's no snow. And she's like, we've had an unseasonably warm winter. And it's like, that's very funny that he's the last thing he says, like, I didn't even get snow. This is the
He
world. This
really
sucks.
wanted to see the snow. You know what? Maybe don't take a PJ then. Maybe fly coach like Anna. You can learn a thing or two from Anna, Eric. Even though
Yeah.
Anna complained about it. She's like, Harper, why did you book me as
Yeah.
flight coach though?
Yeah.
Like, why?
Offset your carbon
Yeah.
footprint, lady. So I want to get to Yasmin and Henry, but I want to have a brief pivot here to Robert.
Mm-hmm.
So did Robert stay the night with Frank? Did Robert and Frank hooked up?
Here's the thing. I don't know. It's very confusing because we know he didn't stay in the room with Eric, right? They were bunking together because of a mistake, which it feels very sitcom-y to me. And he's like, there were some loud noises. I was not going to stay there. And I mean, they're in a sauna. Him and Frank are in a sauna together. And Frank does compliment Robert, saying, "Oh, we have like a list of like the most eligible bachelors at Pierpoint or whatever. Obviously, you're like top of the list, whatever.
Straight bachelors, though.
Straight bachelors.
Also, he is just touching. He's just
And just like
yeah.
what? I mean, HBO. Listen, HBO loves to show wieners. They're just a huge fan.
There was so much criticism about how many boobs they would show, and they're just trying to like they're trying to their best to like.
But I was just not prepared for the zoom out, and then whoa, and he's just touching, and he looks at Robert, and then the scene ends, and I was thinking the same thing, Grace. I'm like, oh, are they gonna do it? I thought this was gonna be more of like a Robert spiral, honestly, because I feel like after the Nicole thing, it feels like, okay, we're bound to see Robert spiraling some more and just go into some dark places and, just having sex with some guy for business reasons. But I mean, if he did, then why would Frank release the numbers during the panel?
Oh, I do not think that they slept together in the sauna. I do not think anything happened in the sauna.
Okay.
I do think that was a little bit of foreshadowing for then the conversation they have after when the stock price is released, because I believe the end of that conversation, I'm just trying to find it in my notes here, and I'm having a little bit of trouble finding it. But basically, I feel like that. Okay, here it is. It's why'd you publish during the panel? Said there was an avalanche of others, and I didn't want to be last. The outlook has changed. And hey, I didn't publish a sell. And he says, yeah, but you work for the company. He goes, yeah, but like, if I published a buy, that doesn't look like, because then he'd be caught up in like, if he shouldn't have, if he's pressured to say buy, that is like probably illegal and and he'd be fined or whatever. And so he says, not legal. She says, not legally. I couldn't have said buy. I could and then he's talks about not being institutionalized like Robert is. And then he says, I think Robert says the least you could do is buy me a drink, and that's the last thing we see of the two of them before. And Robert doesn't stay in the hotel; he stays somewhere else. So my one thing here is like, if we get this is the thing where we have to come on at the end of each individual episode. Not have to, we love to. We're breaking this down. I will say that I think if you're going to do this, where we haven't really seen this from Robert before, we've seen it with Yaz. She has been much more like she's been with Celeste and been with Robert, and she's with Henry. I'm all for it. I'm a little getting rid of Gus, who is a BIPOC queer character on the show. And now this episode where it's like, they do show Joel Kim Booster's whole body.
Everything. You see everything.
But I will hold my judgment for how I feel about how this will turn out after I watch more of the show and after I watch this. So if next episode, like Joel Kim Booster shows up and there's like a kid, whatever we end up seeing, I'm good with it. But I do think to a degree of like the one story, the one time you're like, we don't need to see them kiss or make out or have sex scene.
Yeah,
is potentially the two guys. So I just flag that as like, that can just be. I think it's like I would put it in the camp of like, that's potentially like unconscious bias of like where they're like, ooh, and then we won't show it, and now we'll linger on it and we'll play with.
Like, why are you coy all of the sudden when you've never been coy about anything like that in the past? It makes me wonder, and it's also makes me wonder, like you said, are we going to see this character of Frank again? Like, is he going to come back? Especially because again, it's a person we both recognized, Grace. And so
I
in my
I
mind, I'm always thinking, oh, they're gonna make a return then.
I think Joel Kim Booster, I hadn't really seen much about him joining the cast, but he's probably big enough of a name that you probably get him for more than one episode. Is
Right.
my that is my bet. I would plant a flag there to say we see. I don't think we need to see like not need to. I would love to have Joel Kim Booster just be on the show. That's just love it. I would imagine like he's more like Celeste than he is
Mhm.
like Gus, in terms of like how much he's going to be on the show, or Jesse. He's more Celeste than Jesse, probably, where Jesse was like basically a main character on the
Every
show for season
episode,
two.
yeah.
Celeste is like she's here and there and she's important to, and I would like him to be more in that. I will leave it if next episode there's a lot more and like there could be too this idea of like I can understand too that like if the idea is this is a thing that maybe Robert is just discovering about himself or whatever, and he's hiding it to a degree, um, then I can get the instinct to map out the experience of where next episode it's like, oh, he was hiding that from us. I think that there's just better ways to show that than maybe how they did it. But I will withhold judgment until we get more information. But that's how I feel about what happened this episode with Robert. Let's talk about Yasmin's journey. This I feel soap. I really love Yasmin, both as a character, and I love Marissa Abella here as Yaz. Potentially pulling into the lead as my favorite character on the show. I've kind of been a Harper stan the whole time, but I really do think this episode, where essentially she is brought along on a trip to not in a not professional capacity. Henry literally says this: "You are not here." She goes, "Yes, I effing am." Um, and sort of dragged along throughout this whole thing. Has a big win by the end of it, where she's gonna like pull in she's gonna work with Harper and Petra to like be here. And I thought these scenes were really tremendous. I thought every scene with Yasmin for me was a hit. And I think her relationship with Henry is like fascinating, and it's the same thing as like stop doing this, Yasmin, but like also I understand why you are doing it. We get a little bit more insight into we get more boat scene stuff. What'd you make of Yasmin this episode?
I totally agree with you. I've always really enjoyed Yasmin. Harper has always made me very nervous. She's very bold. And I've always really loved Yasmin, and I really love what they're doing with her this season. I think she's played incredibly well by, is it Marissa Abella? I'm not sure
Marissa Bella,
exactly.
yeah.
Abella.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they've done a really great job, and I mean this as absolutely no slight against the actor. They've done a great job at making her look so tired and just
She
worn
does look
out.
very tired
And I
all the
don't mean
time.
that in like a way where you're like, "Oh,
Yeah,
you look tired." And like
yeah,
they just did a really great job at like not only that, but just her expressions.
yeah.
She just seems just so exhausted with everything. And it must suck to get the invite to go on this trip, right? Oh, how exciting. Like I'm getting a really great work opportunity, only to find out that Robert's also invited. And so then she knows in her heart of hearts that no, it's Henry who wanted her there and who requested her presence. She's getting like, oh, bankers in the back. Oh, except you, Yaz, you stay out here with us because, you're hot and I like you, is essentially what it
He's always
is.
infatuated with new shiny toys, is what his assistant
Yes.
says. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but I just I you have to love Yasmin's attempt at just being taken seriously. Like no one takes her seriously at her job. Honestly, since season 1, people have underestimated her and just really not seen much of her value. And even to I would say like Kenny maybe has, but honestly, I think that's mostly just because he feels very guilty about how he treated her. And
Mm-hmm.
so she's really never taken seriously. And she finally gets a win. Like she finally gets this win because of her connection with Harper. And I then when they're leaving on the PJ, and she's just going to town with Henry on the PJ, everyone sees, everyone hears, and it's like, oh yes, like I know it's like a celebration, but I'm like, this just seems like a bad idea. This doesn't seem like a great idea, especially Grace, we have to talk about the situation with her dad and like what the heck is going on. I know I can't remember who it was on the podcast was planting their flag that they think that Yaz
Josh.
killed Josh.
Josh.
Okay. I think
Sell your stock. Sell your Yasmin killed her dad stock. It got name dropped in this episode. Sell the stock
not
and never
happening.
rehire. More people will
Yeah.
now be like, oh, she must have killed her father. Sell the stock. Sell it. Sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I do like what they're doing in terms of showing the PTSD that she has from those incidences on the yacht by just those quick flashes right in the moment. And that scene with Harper, it really broke my heart when she says, "I hated him so much, so why do I miss him?" Like I hated him.
Oh.
That is awful. That's tough, right? Like I'm sure so many people have that relationship with a family member, probably even a parent, and she's not doing well. And Grace, you said it, this industry is fast paced, the show is fast paced. Like she doesn't have a moment to take a beat and center herself and grieve or move on or get out of the public eye even, before she's just assaulted with cameras and people and all these people that just want tiny pieces of her. It just feels like she's being picked at in a way where she's losing herself over time. And I just think she's being played incredibly well. And she's had this depth of character that wasn't necessarily missing from seasons 1 and 2, but feels like it's being rounded out a bit more. I feel like most of her storylines, at least in season 1, to my recollection, were really based on her sexuality and like her finding her power both in and out of the bedroom. And not that that's a bad storyline for someone to have, but I'm really enjoying seeing Yaz this season and just how she's not being taken seriously and she's really just sick and tired of it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's definitely. I mean, the last scene. I mean, we're still definitely tied up in
Oh,
like.
yes. Yeah.
But what I mean, we saw Yasmin's dad physically abuse her and sort of like harass her. We believe that Robert has a storyline with his. We've said it does seem most likely that Robert was sexually assaulted by his mother. So
Yeah.
I don't again, I feel weird being like, yeah, I don't know if that's where they're going. There's this interesting thing I think when you think about the show, that I think the show is balancing well. And again, I talk about these sometimes when I'm talking about good shows of like, ooh, this is how lesser shows would do that. That really, if you think about it, Harper, Yasmin, and Robert all basically want the same thing, but they are just different enough and just sort of like approach things differently to make for very compelling scenarios. But all of them want control over their lives. Be they want to be in positions where it does feel like they're doing what they think that they're good at, and that is like rewarded in themselves. And Yasmin, I talked about her relationship with Robert really breaks down, I think, mostly because Yasmin wants control, but like what controlled, if Robert is someone who's also looking for control and establishing himself, figuring out who he is, like what control do you really have over a man who you can just make like, jerk off in front of a mirror? Like, okay, great, whatever. Celeste is interesting because that relationship develops, and then she learns like, oh, like I'm just in an open relationship. Like I'm just, so I'm in this thing and you're over here. And when Yasmin tries to assert control, she does not matter. And I think we're in a pretty similar thing again, where I think she's in a relationship with someone and she's trying to figure out like, what does this mean? And I don't necessarily think like, what do I get out of it? But I think that's ultimately there. But now there's this added weight of like, something happened with her father. And I joke about sell the stock, and that's mostly because I think like it did get mentioned in a way on the show that I feel like I'm just more likely to now be like, okay, that's not what it's going to be. So every subsequent episode. But at the same time, like it still absolutely could be that. And the thing with these scenes is that, like, I joke about how quickly the show moves through things. We get in episode 1, we get a flashback. In episode 2, we find out, we see the scene that she's having flashbacks about, and then we see that Harper's on the boat. In episode 3, we now get another new clip of her father yelling at her, seemingly after they have the confrontation that we've seen already. So this is like, I think, how far we'll get into the show before we really find out what happened and why he's missing. But we keep getting like more, and I just think it's a really interesting way to like unveil the information of like, this isn't like, you could see a world where like every episode we get the flashback moments until they tell us what happened, but that's not what they've done. They like flashback, full scene, now more flashback. And so I think that's really interesting and compelling. I do feel like the way Harper and Yasmin have that conversation that I also thought was really tremendous, and the way that they are both so sort of affected and been hurt by the people that, this is why I think like parental abuse is so awful, is because there's this expectation of what a parent is and what they provide for you. And the way that Harper is saying, or sorry, Yasmin is saying, like, but I like, how can I love a man who like I hate so much? And it's because there's societal expectations about what a parent is and what they should be providing, and the ways in which like there are inevitably moments in her life where her father was actually nice to her and was good. And that's what happens in abusive relationships, in which and it's why they're so hard to untangle, and why a lot of like, I'm thinking about like women who leave like men who have been abusive, or leave a partner who's been abusive, because there is also love wrapped up in that, and you want to believe that the moments of love were the real moments and the moments of abuse were not the real moments, and those are outliers. And so when she's having this she's saying this of like, how can I love him and miss him when I hated him, it's because he's her freaking father. And Harper has this awful, I think, terrible thing that no friend should say, but you only say when you're like close, which is like, well, at least you had a father to like, to mess you up or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
Harper,
don't say that. Yep,
come on,
bad.
so bad. But
Well,
also like she's also dealing with Harper's also dealing with her own stuff,
Yeah, I guess it just makes me sad because Yaz feels like she so desperately needs a support system and she just doesn't have one. And she constantly has been wanting Harper to also be that support system, right? Like, I feel like she's gone out of her way. She invited Harper to live with her. She got Harper this other job. Like, it feels like she's gone out of her way to kind of connect with Harper and almost like in a Grey's Anatomy, like Meredith and Christina Yang sort of like, you're my person. It feels like she's trying to find that. And it feels like she still doesn't have it. And it just makes me really sad for Yaz. Not that any of these people really have the best support system, but it just feels like she's very alone. And I want more for her. And so my question for you, Grace, is even now that we've heard the like, did you kill your dad? It's like, okay, well, she probably didn't. Do you think
I don't know,
but you but
I'm saying, I think Sawyer Stock, I think it's more likely they didn't, but I think he might be. I don't know.
so
I'm not out on it, but
I want you to put your flag. Do you think Yaz knows where he is or what happened to him? Do you think she's aware?
I think what now happened is that he died, but I don't think it was Yasmin who killed him. I think is like, she knows that he's dead, and
Okay.
that's like a satisfying like, right, like he's been yelling at her, he's thrown wine on her, he's like sat on top of her and like all of this stuff. My gut instinct would be like, they didn't kill him. This is where I would plant my flag, because they say like, you kill your dad. I don't think, and just like the conversation between Yasmin and Harper is not like, holy shit, people know that, like people are gonna figure it. Like, it's not that. And they could both be cold and calculating enough that like, that's, I could get that a little bit from Harper, where I could feel like Harper's like, don't worry about it. Nobody actually blah 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 blah. Yasmin, I don't think would take it that well. I think probably they are like witnesses or know what happened, but they didn't actually kill him. That would be where I would plant my flag. I think the thing I just want to touch on with Yasmin, I think before we wrap up here, is that the idea that she goes to Harper and does kind of get, Harper at least apologizes immediately for saying the thing about mom. But if we're looking at Yasmin's storyline of being like, in each season so far, she's been looking for someone in terms of like who romantically she can be entangled
Yeah,
with.
Robert, Celeste. Yeah.
And now we have Henry, and Henry in the pool. He's closed. Sorry, the pool is closed because Henry
Jon
Muff
Snow
played.
butt. Sorry,
We
I
do get
had
Jon
to.
Snow.
I was so excited to see Jon Snow butt.
We got Jon
wouldn't
Snow
be?
butt. Yeah.
Mhm.
But we get this very like, I thought interesting. Again, I think a show that like, Henry's not a good guy, but he tells a story that you can't feel but have the teeniest bit of empathy for him, where he tells him,
Mhm.
my dad, you know, died by suicide, and I've been there. I have had those thoughts about doing it, and I would build something, and I would never feel like that, and I've never felt sadder than like today. I feel as sad as like the day my dad died, and I'm like, oh my god, that's like, it's brutal. The other thing that happens here, I think it's very interesting in terms of like a spot moving forward is that we're talking about how Yasmin wants to be in control. She wants to prove that she is smart, and she's I'm not here. I am here in a professional capacity. Well, she tells Henry to sell all his Lumi stock. You can make millions of dollars, and he goes and calls and does just that. And so he listened to her. He gave up. He says, "I wanted to build something," and she said, "You could sell it." And he listens and he sells it. The thing that he thought would fill the void in his heart of his father dying, he listens to Yasmin and decides to sell that thing, get rid of that thing. That Lumi, it's very interesting. Essentially, Lumi is dead. As far as there's no way they could probably recover. It would be interesting to see. I don't think any way they can recover from their CEO and founder, creator, selling all of his Lumi stock. And that seems like it will happen by the morning. He says, let me know when it's hit my bank account. So I don't know. And he also says this thing. She says, I haven't had sex with anybody in 5 months. And he says, well, you're still alive. So there's like this weird thing that they have. I think it's true. I think this is such a good Kit Harington performance here. Like, it's really good. I think this is a thing that could elevate him from being Jon Snow into being something else, which I think is very exciting, because I think that like there's a tough thing with people who are in the most famous shows on in the world who get stuck into like, what is a thing you've seen Daenerys Targaryen in past Game of Thrones? Like, what have you seen? Like, she's been in stuff, but has she broken out after being in the most successful show in the world? Like, no. And so I think interestingly, we haven't really talked about this on these pods. He walked away from the Jon Snow show. He said there wasn't really anything captivating enough, and he approached industry about being on the show. So he came, and then they're like, okay, well, we're gonna have you be obsessed with being peed on, and you're gonna be an awful dude. He's like, great. So I just think that this scene was very good. Did you catch who he called? Who his personal wealth advisor is? Did you catch this?
Oh, was it Celeste?
It is Celeste. So
Yeah,
I don't know that had been tagged before, but
yeah. It's interesting. I'm excited to see where we go from here, because like you said, we're moving at a rapid fire pace, and to already have Lumi be kind of like, okay, we're done. We're moving on. It's fascinating. And I think just the beginning of Henry and Yaz and the ways in which they connect, like, it's obvious that he's drawn to her, but again, to my earlier point of listen to who people tell you they are, his assistant seems to think he just likes shiny new objects for a little bit of time and then moves on. I hope that Yaz isn't just a shiny little object for him that he eventually moves on from. Like, I hope she has a little bit more agency in all of that. But certainly interesting. I mean, could this be the beginning of Yaz getting her groove back? Possibly. We'll see. I'm really enjoying Henry as a character, and I'm really excited to see more scenes between Henry and Yaz, because I find them to be very compelling in a way of like, they shouldn't be together because he's awful and you don't want that for Yaz, and you want them to stay away from each other, but also there's chemistry and they're like magnets just being drawn together.
Her look in the pool when she's like just in the pool and looking, and I'm like, this is great. It's so bad, but it's so good.
It is, and I thought it was a really excellent choice, actually. He's already in the pool, and we don't know he's naked until later when he gets out and you see all that Jon Snow butt. But she's in a full like one-piece bathing suit, a very modest bathing suit, which I thought was really just a smart decision to like not only just show like the contrast between them, but like maybe she just is like on the TikTok trend of like this very demure, very mindful.
Wow, this is the first time I've been on a pod where we got to say demure, I think. So that's fun. Very demure, very mindful. Also, I know if you're sick of that trend, God bless you, but that woman is a trans woman who did that via TikTok and has paid for her entire transition. And I got to have a meeting with Netflix today. So hell yeah to her.
Love that for her.
Yes.
Love that for her.
Every time you see a TikTok that has very, if you're sick of it, please, for her, please listen to the whole TikTok.
Just let people live their lives and like make money from like a silly TikTok that like seriously improves someone's life. You know,
it's very silly. It's the easiest way. It's the easiest way to do it.
It's very lovely. I love that story.
Well, I thought this was Trend's episode. I love the way that every storyline basically like intertwines together. Eric having glitter on the side of his face, tremendous. No notes. I do feel like I'm taking pretty careful notes here, and every episode I do feel like there's been something that I've really loved. Last episode it was like when there's like no, you instituted a no jacket policy, and he puts on the jacket, and actually I didn't catch this previously, but that is the jacket of the investor who left the investment company of Lumi, who took all his money. So he had to put on a jacket of the Ashfield set, which is very funny. But my favorite line of the episode is there's this guy this episode who joins Henry, his friend, who's just lingering around, and he totally sucks. He's DJing tomorrow night at the thing, even though his parents own like the hotel or whatever. No, those things aren't related, he says. But I believe it's the same man who later says, "Look at this old F" to Eric, to which Susie, the woman that Eric will pay for, says, "Babe, he can hear you." Tremendous. No notes. Very good.
It's so sad.
All right.
Eric gets called old too many times this episode, and he's not that old. Calm down.
This is like when I'm watching sports, and they'll be like, this is a pretty famous tweet, so forgive me, but there'll be like a lot where, and I feel every time they're like, "Look at that 30-year-old person past their prime, still keeping in it." And you're like, hey, yeah. Also,
30.
and just one last thing, Eric on the plane talks about Frank, and he says he's a tastemaker. So just
love that.
Just you gotta love to see it on HBO Sunday Nights Industry. Very excited to see what we have coming up next, Jess. Thank you for joining us to chat about industry.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely getting to listen to this behind the scenes. It's great getting to chat with you. It feels like, the old days.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, it's been a great time, and I'm excited to see what else industry is going to throw at us for season 3.
So I presume Jess, Josh, and Emily will be back for the next episode. But who knows? Oh, also, just while we're here, I mean, it is my birthday. Happy birthday! Oh, thank you so much. That's the industry. This is the gift that they gave me, was Joel Kim Booster. Yeah, all of Joel. Thank you very much. But we'll be back for next week's episode. Anything else you got going on, Jess, that you want to let people know about?
You could find me both on Shit 90 Shows Taught Me, where I'm talking about Buffy and Felicity. We love 90s content over there. And then also on Talkin' Shit with my friend Stuart, where we're covering Schitt's Creek, which you might see some Grace on there very soon. So go check it out.
So fun. I'm very excited. Yeah, check out the rest of our tastemakers. Taryn and I will be back later this week. We have also announced that we are going to be doing Rings of Power coverage. So look out for a little preview pod that should drop soon, because that show drops, I believe, at the time you're listening to this Thursday is the premiere of season 2 of Rings of Power. And check out everything else we got going on Media Scripted TV. Tell a friend, let them know what we're doing here. And thanks for joining us. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.